Welcome to Why This Keeps Happening. From trauma to transformation, the deep dive that helps you break free from repeating patterns and create the life you want. We're unpacking the groundbreaking work of Mark and Lynetta.
And we really are diving into something today that I think is going to fundamentally shift how you look at your own life.
Oh, absolutely. But before we get into all that, I want you to just picture this scenario for a second.
Yeah.
You are a highly successful, fully grown adult. You run a business, you manage a household, you navigate all these complex relationships, right?
Right, you're fiercely independent.
Exactly. But the second your mother walks into your kitchen, looks at your countertops, and lets out this one specific tiny sigh, you just instantly shrink.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Your heart rate spikes, your stomach drops, and suddenly you aren't a CEO or a capable parent anymore. You are this terrified, defensive 7-year-old child just desperately trying to prove you didn't do anything wrong.
Which is such a visceral experience for so many people.
It really is.
Yeah.
So why does that happen? And much more importantly, how do you finally make it stop? That is exactly what we are unpacking today in this deep dive into Mark and Lynetta's transformative framework, I Want My Mommy.
Yeah, and our mission here is to really help you, yes, you listening right now, untangle yourself from what might literally be decades of dysfunctional parent-child dynamics.
Because it's a heavy load to carry.
It is. We want to look at how you can finally remove those incredibly heady burdens of guilt, of pressurized anger, and, unresolved grief. We want you to figure out how to create a relationship with your parents that fundamentally works for your life today.
And I think it is so crucial to frame exactly why this specific exploration matters. Like why that scenario I just described hits so incredibly close to home.
Well, because we aren't sitting here today tossing around sterile clinical psychology terms, right? Or abstract academic theories that look great on a whiteboard but just completely fall apart in your actual living room.
Right. The real world is messy.
Exactly. We are talking about the complex, often painful reality of your day-to-day life. And Mark and Lynetta walked this exact path themselves.
They really did. Lynetta experienced 60 years, 6 entire decades, of parental obsession, of desperate yearning for approval, and just deep psychological pain.
Before they systematically discovered and built these tools, they aren't just teaching this from some safe distance behind a textbook. They lived it from the inside out.
They really excavated their own lives to build this framework. So as we navigate these concepts, you can completely trust that these insights are profoundly battle-tested.
I love that phrase, battle-tested. Because this really is a battle for our own peace of mind, isn't it?
It totally is. And to understand how we get trapped in these dynamics, we really have to go back to the origin. We have to look at what Lynetta calls the bed-making moment.
Right, because this is the exact moment where the inner critic, that harsh, unrelenting voice inside your head, is actually born.
Yes. Okay, let's set the scene for you listening. Lynetta is 7 years old. And one morning, she makes this massive decision. She decides she is going to make her bed all by herself for the very first time.
Which is a huge deal at 7.
Huge. Now, she has been watching her mom, Marilyn, do this for her entire life. And Marilyn doesn't just make beds. She, engineers them.
Military precision.
Exactly. We're talking absolute military precision. Hospital corners, pillows tightly tucked under the heavy cover, that perfect unwrinkled crease running right underneath.
Right, the gold standard of bed making.
So 7-year-old Lynetta puts her entire little heart and soul into this task. She mimics everything she's ever seen her mother do. And when she finishes, she is just bursting with pride.
She feels this absolute undeniable triumph.
She runs down the hall. She calls her mom into the room. She says, "Mom, come look at the bed I made." She is standing there practically vibrating with anticipation.
Just waiting for Marilyn to look at her and say, "Lynetta, you did such a good job."
That anticipation, it's such a universal childhood experience. It is that pure, unadulterated yearning to be seen, right? To be validated by the person who literally represents your entire world.
Oh, entirely. And here is where it gets incredibly devastating. Marilyn walks into the room. She looks at the bed. She doesn't yell.
She isn't overtly cruel.
Right. She doesn't raise a hand, and she doesn't say a single word. In complete, suffocating silence, Marilyn just walks over to the bed, pulls off all the covers, and starts remaking it herself.
And little Lynetta just stands there in absolute shock.
What is fascinating here, and honestly fundamentally tragic is the psychological mechanics of what happens next. A 7-year-old simply does not possess the cognitive development to step back and analyze that situation objectively.
Right, they can't rationalize it.
No, a child cannot think, oh, mom is under a lot of stress right now. She has severe perfectionist tendencies, and she uses control over chores to manage her own anxiety.
Yeah, that requires an adult context that a kid just doesn't have.
Exactly. Instead, children personalize everything. The world revolves entirely around them.
But wait, I want to push back on that for a second, or at least admit where I think a lot of people get confused.
Okay, sure.
If a parent is acting cold or doing something clearly dismissive like silently destroying the kid's hard work, wouldn't a child's natural instinct be to get mad at the parent?
You would think so, right?
Yeah, like why is the default setting for a kid to instantly turn that anger inward and blame themselves? It seems totally counterintuitive to survival.
That is a brilliant question, and the answer actually lies directly in evolutionary biology. It is precisely because of survival that the child turns the blame inward.
Really? How so?
Think about it from an evolutionary standpoint. A 7-year-old child is completely 100% dependent on their caregivers to survive. If the mammoth attacks, the parent is the shield.
Okay, they're cracking.
Therefore, the child's brain has this evolutionary imperative to view the parent as infallible, omnipotent, perfectly capable of protecting them.
So they have to be perfect.
Yes. If the child were to look at the parent and say, my mother is deeply flawed, emotionally unavailable, and reacting irrationally, the child's nervous system would instantly register a catastrophic threat.
If my protector is broken, I am going to die.
Exactly. So the child's brain does this brilliant, albeit deeply painful psychological pivot. To keep the parent infallible, the child decides that they must be the broken one.
Wow.
The translation in young Lynetta's mind is instantaneous. Mom is remaking the bed, mom is perfect, therefore I didn't do it right, therefore there is something fundamentally wrong with me.
Okay, that makes so much sense. It's an immediate, unconscious mathematical equation to ensure survival. Parent equals God, therefore any failure in the dynamic equals my inherent lack of value.
Precisely, and because this specific interaction happens in total silence, there's no logical argument for the child to push back against.
The silence is just a void.
Right, it acts as a vacuum, and the child's brain rushes to fill that vacuum with self-blame. In that split second, Lynetta made a life-altering decision.
Her foundational decision was like, nothing I do is ever good enough.
Exactly. I can't do anything right, so I might as well let other people do it because they will always do it better.
And here's the terrifying part. That single silent moment turns into a 60-year life sentence.
60 years.
A decision made by a 7-year-old trying not to get eaten by an emotional mammoth becomes this invisible, impenetrable filter for all her future creativity, her work, and her relationships.
Because she made that foundational decision, she spent decades completely terrified of putting her original work out into the world.
Which brings us to the mechanism of the inner critic. We often wonder why we are so brutal to ourselves.
Well, the inner critic is actually an anticipatory defense mechanism. Your brain remembers the devastation of having that bed torn apart by the person you loved most.
So it's trying to protect you.
Yes. As you grow up, your brain decides, I am never going to let anyone surprise me with that kind of pain ever again. I am going to attack my own work first.
You tear down your own creations before anyone else can.
It's like a castle's own guards burning down the courtyard, so the invading army has nothing left to burn. You literally take over the job your parents started.
Yes, you become your own harshest critic to preempt the strike. And Lynetta tells this incredible story that perfectly illustrates how this mechanism operates in real time.
Oh, the Mexico story.
Yes. So, years later, as a highly successful adult, Lynetta hosts this beautiful goddess retreat down in Mexico. Her husband, Mark, couldn't go, so he's back home.
Right.
Every single night of the retreat, Lynetta calls Mark, and she is over the moon. She's raving about the attendees, detailing these massive breakthroughs the women are having.
She is literally reporting massive success to him in real time, night after night.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. Before she ever even left for the trip, she had warned Mark. She told him, I'm probably going to come home and completely rip my own work apart.
She knew her own programming. She knew that anticipatory defense mechanism was going to kick in.
She knew it. And sure enough, she gets home from Mexico, and within 2 days, just 2 days, she is sitting there telling Mark, Oh gosh, that retreat was terrible.
This part wasn't good, my presentation was off, that exercise fell flat.
Right. She systematically, ruthlessly invalidated her own
Yeah.
massive success. Mark was stunned. He told her, if you hadn't warned me you were going to do this, I wouldn't believe you because I heard the pure joy in your voice.
She had entirely taken over Marilyn's job. Marilyn wasn't there to walk into the room and remake the bed, so Lynetta remade the bed in her own mind.
Tearing down her own beautiful creation.
I want to pause right here and speak directly to you, the listener. Think about your own life. Where are you currently taking over the job of criticizing yourself?
That is such a powerful question.
What achievements, what projects, what moments of joy are you actively tearing down before anyone else even has a chance to look at them? Because what we are talking about here is an invisible operating system running in the background of your daily life.
But again, I have to ask the obvious question. It still seems wild that a program installed 50 or 60 years ago can dictate how you run a business today.
It does seem wild.
How do we just not notice this massive destructive software operating in our minds?
We don't notice it because to us it doesn't feel like software. It feels like reality. It feels like the air we breathe. When you make a decision that young, it becomes the water you swim in, and a fish doesn't question the concept of water.
So true.
Until we intentionally trace our current reactions back and identify the specific origin moment, like the bed-making moment, we just assume that the thought, I'm not enough, is a fundamental objective truth about the universe.
We think it's just a law of physics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rather than a faulty subjective decision made by a vulnerable 7-year-old child trying to make sense of a silent room.
That is why uncovering the origin moment isn't just like a nice exercise in nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
It is the vital first step to dismantling the entire invisible operating system. Okay, so once we identify that origin moment, once we realize that our feelings of inadequacy aren't objective truths, but childhood decisions,
Right.
what do we actually do? Because the event still happened.
The bed was still remade.
The childhood was what it was.
Ah.
This brings us to a concept Mark and Lynetta teach called the gap.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, this concept shifted everything about how I process reality.
The gap is arguably the most powerful piece of leverage you have in your psychological toolkit.
Tell them how it works.
The principle is this. There is a distinct, measurable space, a gap between an event that happens to you and the feelings you experience afterward.
Right.
Now, we are culturally conditioned to believe that our emotions are entirely automatic. We say things like, they made me angry, or that situation made me sad.
Yeah, we speak as if our emotions are just forced upon us by external events.
But the absolute reality of human psychology and neuroscience is that there are no automatic emotions.
Let me stop you there,
Oh,
because that is a massive claim. No automatic emotions at all. If someone yells in my face, my anger isn't automatic.
It is not. The physiological arousal, your heart rate spiking, adrenaline flooding your system, that is an automatic biological response from your amygdala detecting a potential threat.
Okay, so the body reacts automatically.
Yes. But the emotion, the anger, the sadness, the feeling of betrayal, that requires a cognitive process.
Oh, wow.
There are literal milliseconds between the amygdala's threat response and your prefrontal cortex assigning meaning to that threat. In that tiny physiological gap, you interpret the data.
So the event itself is just neutral data. Someone raising their voice is just sound waves.
Exactly. But in the gap, you assign meaning to those sound waves. They are yelling, therefore they don't respect me. And based on the meaning you assign, your interpretation of that event generated a feeling.
Even when we are children, we are making a choice in that gap,
Right.
albeit an unconscious one based on limited survival information.
Right. Little Lynetta chose a feeling of profound inadequacy in that gap when her mother remade the bed.
The vital takeaway here is that you are a creator. You are continuously generating your emotions based on your own interpretations.
That gives you so much power back.
It's like, okay, here's an analogy. It's like driving down the highway and hitting a massive pothole. Hitting the pothole, that's the event.
A very jarring event.
Getting a flat tire, that is the physical, undeniable result of the event.
Mm-hmm.
But getting out of your car, throwing your hands up, and screaming at the sky in total despair.
That is the reaction you actively choose to put into the gap.
Yes, you could just as easily choose to put a deep breath into the gap, pull out the jack, and calmly change the tire. The pothole didn't force you to scream at the sky.
That is a brilliant analogy. The pothole is a neutral, albeit highly inconvenient, fact of the environment. Your reaction is entirely your creation.
And understanding this gives you incredible leverage.
It really does. If you realize that your feelings aren't being forced upon you by external events or by your parents' behavior, then you realize you hold the keys.
You are no longer a victim of your circumstances. You are the active architect of your internal experience.
And this leads directly into how Mark helped Lynetta start to navigate that exact space. Because once you recognize the gap, you have to look at what you've been stuffing into it for the last 30, 40, or 50 years.
Oh, yeah. And for most of us, what we stuff into the gap is a massive amount of shame and self-judgment for the fact that we are still hurting over these old events.
Which is such a heavy burden.
Mark offered Lynetta a phrase that became an incredibly profound tool for this. He listened to her talk about desperately wanting her mom to praise the bed, and he didn't psychoanalyze her.
No, he just looked at her and said, of course you wanted that.
Of course you wanted that. The psychological relief contained in those 6 words is staggering.
Yes, because for decades, Lynetta had been telling herself she was silly, or overly sensitive, or foolish for obsessing over something as small as making a bed.
She was adding a thick, suffocating layer of shame right on top of the original hurt.
Which is incredibly common. We experience a primary pain, the lack of validation, the silent rejection from a parent. But then as we grow older and our prefrontal cortex develops, we recognize that we should be over it. We tell ourselves that strong, independent adults don't cry over childhood slights.
So we create a secondary pain.
The shame of still hurting. We judge ourselves for our own completely natural emotional responses.
Mark's phrase, "of course you wanted that," instantly dissolves that secondary pain. It validates the primary ache without a single ounce of judgment.
It acknowledges the absolute biological and psychological reality of the situation.
Of course, a 7-year-old girl wants her mother to praise her first independent attempt at making a bed. What else would she want?
Why on earth wouldn't she want that?
I want you, listening right now, to apply this to yourself. What is the thing you are still waiting for your mom or your dad to say to you?
Are you waiting for an apology for how they treated you in high school?
Are you waiting to hear the words, "I'm proud of you"? Are you waiting for them to finally, just once, acknowledge how hard you've worked to build your life?
Whatever that specific thing is, I want you to bring it to the forefront of your mind right now. Hold it there.
Think about how long you've been carrying it. Carrying around that original hurt is like carrying a heavy backpack full of rocks.
It's exhausting.
And when you add shame and guilt to that hurt, when you judge yourself for still wanting their approval at 30, 40, or 60 years old, you are basically strapping on a second heavy backpack.
It is physically and emotionally exhausting.
But the exact moment you look at that lingering desire and say to yourself out loud, "Of course I feel this way. Of course I wanted them to see me. Of course I wanted them to protect me," you immediately drop that second backpack.
You strip away the guilt for wanting the most natural thing in the world, the love and validation of your parent.
And by dropping that second backpack, you conserve an immense amount of psychological energy.
And you are going to need every ounce of that energy for the next phase of this process. Because once the shame is gone, you are still left holding the original backpack of hurt.
Right. The events still happen.
Exactly. So if we are dropping that second backpack of shame, we are still left holding the original hurt. We still have all this pressurized anger and sadness.
What do we actually do with that?
Yeah.
Because you can't just wish it away. You can't just slap a positive affirmation over it.
This brings us to the vital distinction Mark and Lynetta make regarding emotional clearing. We have to be very precise with our language here.
Oh, this is so important.
We are talking strictly about release. We are not talking about forgiveness. We are intentionally and explicitly avoiding the concept of forgiveness in this framework.
Yes, and it is vital to unpack why that distinction is not just semantics, but a profound psychological boundary.
In many cultural and societal contexts, the word forgiveness carries a very heavy connotation of forced absolution.
It implies that you must somehow pardon the other person's behavior, or declare that what they did is now okay.
Or that you are obligated to reconcile with them and let them back into your life.
For someone who has experienced deep neglect, psychological manipulation, or mistreatment, being told they must forgive to heal can feel like a further violation of their boundaries.
It feels like letting the perpetrator off the hook while you are still standing there bleeding. It feels like an obligation placed on the victim.
Exactly. It feels like a chore you have to do for someone else's benefit. But release is entirely different. Release is not about the other person at all.
Release is an act of profound self-preservation.
It is about recognizing that holding on to the toxic, pressurized energy of a past event is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
That's a great way to put it. Release is the physical and emotional act of unclenching your fists.
It is cutting the energetic cord that keeps you tied to that painful past and letting the toxic energy flow out of your body so that you can move forward unburdened.
You aren't saying the event was okay. You are stating unequivocally that the event no longer gets to dictate your present reality.
And a major component of what needs to be released is anger. When we experience childhood shock, whether from severe mistreatment or simply from being chronically ignored, there's a natural, profound anger that arises.
But most of us were explicitly or implicitly taught that anger is an unacceptable emotion.
Perhaps you grew up in a household where only the parents were allowed to express anger.
And if a child showed even a hint of frustration, they were punished severely. So you learn to swallow it. You learn to suppress the biological response.
And when you suppress it, you create this highly pressurized block inside your body. It doesn't just disappear, it gets stored.
Which is why Lynetta uses the analogy of a volcano for anger. And I think this is absolutely brilliant.
Think about a volcano in nature. When a volcano erupts, lava flows. It might alter the landscape, it might burn some trees down, but a volcano doesn't apologize for erupting.
The Earth isn't bad for having a volcano.
A volcano isn't a moral failure. It is a completely natural, structurally necessary pressure release valve for the Earth's ecosystem.
What's fascinating here is how we vilify our own natural ecosystem. Anger is not a bad emotion. In fact, there are no bad emotions.
Anger is simply a natural biological response to having your boundaries violated or your fundamental needs ignored. It must be felt.
If you try to stop a volcano, the pressure doesn't dissipate. It just builds and builds until there is a catastrophic, uncontrolled explosion that destroys relationships.
Or worse, the pressure turns inward, and it destroys you from the inside out in the form of chronic depression, severe anxiety, or even autoimmune issues.
So the goal isn't to meditate your way into never being angry. The goal is to channel that volcano safely.
Mark and Lynetta advocate for finding safe, controlled environments to let that anger flow. This doesn't mean you go scream at a barista or break plates in your kitchen.
No, definitely not. It means finding a dedicated space. Maybe you drive out deep into nature where no one can hear you and you just scream.
Or you use specific guided meditations designed to help you access and physically release that stored somatic anger.
You actively excavate it. You unstopper the volcano and let the heat out without hurting yourself or anyone else.
And here's what happens when you do that.
Yeah.
Right beneath that layer of anger, once the lava has finally flowed and the immense pressure is released, you will almost always find a deep, quiet well of sadness and grief.
This leads to the next necessary phase of release, which is perhaps the most painful, grieving the fantasy parent.
Oh man, the fantasy parent. This is a tough pill to swallow.
It really is.
Lynetta talks openly about how she had this vivid imagination as a kid. And to survive the emotional neglect, she built up this incredible fantasy parent in her head.
She likened it to a Marcia Brady idealized parent.
Right. Someone straight out of a 1950s or 60s television show. Always understanding, always warm, baking cookies, ready to offer the perfect advice, and validating her completely.
And for decades, Lynetta lived in this quiet, desperate hope that one day Marilyn was going to suddenly transform into this fantasy parent.
She hoped Marilyn would walk through the door, look at her, and say, "Lynetta, I am so incredibly proud of the woman you've become."
Holding on to that hope is a form of exquisite psychological torture. Because as long as you are hoping for the fantasy parent to arrive, you are actively rejecting the reality of the parent standing right in front of you.
You are constantly setting yourself up for fresh disappointment over and over again.
You have to accept the absolute finality that the fantasy parent is never going to walk through the door.
The beautiful script you wrote for them in your head, they are never going to read those lines. They don't even know they are in the play.
And accepting that is an active, painful process of grieving. You have to mourn the death of the parent you wished you had. And you have to mourn the childhood you wished you had experienced.
It's a profound loss. But on the other side of that, grief is immense clarity and liberation.
Once you stop waiting for the fantasy parent to magically appear and save you, you realize that you possess the power to save yourself.
And this is where the practice of inner child reparenting becomes so transformative. Since the parent in the physical world cannot or will not provide what the child needed, you, as the capable, empathetic, powerful adult you are today, step in to provide it.
I want to go deep into the visualization tool they use for this because it is so incredibly concrete.
Yeah, let's go back to the bed-making moment. The reparenting process involves you, as the adult you are right now, closing your eyes and vividly visualizing yourself walking right into that bedroom from 50 years ago.
You see the 7-year-old version of yourself standing there, absolutely crushed, watching Marilyn silently rip the sheets off the bed.
As the adult, you walk up and stand right next to that little girl. You put your hand on her shoulder.
And from a neuroplasticity standpoint, this is where the magic happens. The human brain, specifically the amygdala, does not easily distinguish between a vividly imagined emotional experience and a physical one occurring in the present moment.
Wow, so it feels real to the brain.
Exactly. By consistently returning to that memory and reparenting that inner child, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways.
You are overlaying a narrative of safety and the undeniable right to create your own environment on top of the old, rigid narrative of inadequacy.
You are tricking your nervous system into finally feeling safe.
You establish a protective, validating presence that was entirely absent in the original event. And you speak to her. You say the words she so desperately needed to hear.
In Lynetta's case, she visualized stopping the scene right as Marilyn walked out of the room. She turned to little Lynetta and said, "Honey, your mom couldn't appreciate it. She is in her own world, and she has her own struggles."
But I see what you did. I see that you put your whole heart into making this bed, and it is beautiful. I am so proud of you. Let's go outside and play.
You give the child the exact validation she craved, and you give it from the only source that actually matters now, yourself.
And as you do this, as you consistently fulfill your own unmet needs, something really beautiful and unexpected starts to happen regarding how you view your actual parent.
You start to develop a wider lens. You step out of the child's perspective and into an adult's perspective.
This brings us to understanding Marilyn's context. When Lynetta finally got curious instead of furious, she asked her mom about her own childhood. And the data she uncovered changed everything.
Let's pause right here and look at this because this is huge. Think about your own parents' history. Not their excuses, but their historical data.
What was the emotional currency in their childhood home?
Right. Lynetta found out that Marilyn was raised in a tiny house with 11 kids.
11.
Marilyn was constantly doing chores, cooking massive meals, cleaning, doing literal mountains of dishes, and her siblings didn't lift a finger to help.
And guess what? Nobody ever thanked Marilyn. Nobody ever looked at a young Marilyn and said, "You did a good job today."
The concept of external validation literally did not exist in her childhood ecosystem.
That historical context is critical, because what did Marilyn learn to do to survive that emotionally barren environment?
She learned that if she wanted any kind of acknowledgement, she had to manufacture it herself.
She literally told Lynetta, "I just patted myself on the back." Marilyn's entire psychological framework was built on rigid self-reliance in a devoid emotional landscape.
So when 7-year-old Lynetta is standing there in the bedroom, visibly needing external praise, Marilyn's brain is literally incapable of computing that need.
Marilyn's operating system says, you do the job, you pat yourself on the back, and you move on to the next chore.
Once you map their historical data, their inability to meet your needs suddenly looks less like a targeted, malicious assassination of your character and much more like a tragic lack of software.
Marilyn wasn't trying to crush Lynetta's soul. She was just operating out of her own deeply ingrained survival mechanisms.
And realizing this builds true compassion. But again, let's be extremely precise with our vocabulary here. This is about compassion, not mercy.
That distinction is paramount. Mercy implies a dynamic of hierarchy, of superiority and inferiority, like a powerful, benevolent king sitting on a throne, sparing a guilty peasant.
It has a condescending, arrogant undertone.
Compassion, on the other hand, is a lateral connection. It's eye level. It is recognizing the shared human struggle.
It's looking at your parent and saying, I see the severe limitations of your programming. I see that you could only give what you had, and you simply did not possess the emotional vocabulary to give me what I needed.
Compassion doesn't excuse their behavior, and it certainly doesn't mean you have to tolerate continued mistreatment, but it radically changes the emotional texture of how you view them.
It neutralizes the reactive charge.
It takes the sting out of it. It's no longer a personal, agonizing attack against your worth. It's just a tragic reflection of their limitations.
So what happens after you've released the anger, grieved the fantasy parent, rewired your brain by reparenting your inner child, and found some lateral compassion?
Where do you go from there? because you still have to interact with the world and maybe even with this parent.
This is where the dynamic shifts from passive healing to active creation. We are moving from surviving to building.
Yes, once you have cleared out all that stored emotional debris, you enter what Mark and Lynetta refer to as a neutral space. Think of it as a completely clear blank canvas.
When you are consumed by anger, grief, or the desperate need for validation, you are operating strictly in survival mode. Your entire focus every single day is just on getting through without being triggered.
Your nervous system is redlining.
But in this neutral space, the survival alarms are finally quiet. You have emotional and intellectual freedom. You are no longer reacting to the past. You are ready to start creating your future.
But let's be honest, staring at a completely blank canvas can be incredibly intimidating, especially if you spent your entire life as a people pleaser, constantly contorting your personality to fit other people's needs and moods.
If someone suddenly sits you down and asks, well, what do you actually want? Your mind might just go completely blank.
You've never been allowed to ask that question.
Yeah.
So Mark and Lynetta have a highly practical exercise to bridge this gap and get you creating.
And counterintuitively, it starts by looking at the negative space. It's hard to know what you want, so you start by making a concrete list of what you absolutely don't want.
Human psychology is naturally biased toward recognizing threats and discomforts. This is known as the negativity bias. So it is much, much easier to access our aversions than our desires.
You sit down and reflect on all the major relationships in your life, especially with your parents, and you simply list the behaviors and dynamics that caused you pain.
It's a brain dump.
Mm-hmm.
You just let it flow. You write down, I don't want to be constantly criticized about my career. I don't want to be yelled at when someone is stressed.
I don't want to be spoken down to like a child. I don't want my opinions ignored. I don't want to feel a spike of anxiety every single time my phone rings.
Most people can fill pages with their don't want list in a matter of minutes.
And once you have that comprehensive list of what you don't want, you engage in the process of flipping the script. You use the negative to illuminate the positive.
You take another piece of paper, and for every single item on your don't want list, you write down its exact opposite.
This is where you build your do want list. So if your don't want list says, I don't want to be criticized, you flip it, and your do want list becomes, I want to be spoken to with kindness and respect.
If it says, I don't want to be ignored, you flip it to, I want active listening. I want to be heard and understood.
You are literally translating your historical pain into a customized blueprint for your future boundaries and desires.
And this blueprint becomes the absolute foundation for establishing workability in your relationships.
Now, we must heavily emphasize the term workability here, deliberately avoiding words like compromise or sacrifice.
Yes, let's hover on this, because this is a massive paradigm shift. When we hear the word compromise in the context of toxic family dynamics, it usually means we are being asked to give up a piece of our soul to keep the peace.
It means I'll let you disrespect me a little bit and I'll swallow my feelings if you agree to act relatively normal during Thanksgiving dinner.
That is a sacrifice. That is abandoning yourself to maintain a dysfunctional connection. Workability is completely different. Workability is structural. It's engineering.
That's a profound way to look at it. If you're building a suspension bridge, you don't compromise on the steel girders or the weight-bearing columns.
If you compromise on the structural integrity, the bridge collapses and people get hurt.
Workability asks a very clinical question. What are the absolute structural requirements for this relationship to function safely and beneficially for everyone involved?
You aren't being stubborn. You are simply stating the laws of physics for your emotional well-being.
You are saying, for me to interact with you safely, the environment must contain active listening and a baseline of respect. Without those structural elements, the interaction simply lacks workability. It will collapse.
Okay, let's put this into a real-world scenario so we can see how workability operates when the rubber meets the road, because it can get messy.
Let's invent a hypothetical friend.
Let's say our friend Sarah has a mother who constantly critiques her weight. Every single time they see each other, the mom makes a passive-aggressive comment about what Sarah is eating or how her clothes fit.
So Sarah's don't want list is crystal clear. I don't want my body criticized.
Her do want list is, I want our conversations to be about our lives, our interests, and our connection, not my physical appearance.
How does Sarah use this do want list to demand workability without instantly falling back into the old dynamic?
Because we know what the mom is going to do. The mom is going to use the classic guilt trap. She's going to say, I'm just worried about your health. Why are you so sensitive?
That is the classic counterattack. Weaponizing the boundary. to induce guilt and force Sarah back into submission.
For Sarah to demand workability successfully, she must first be deeply anchored in that neutral space we discussed.
She must have reparented herself so she no longer actually needs her mother's approval of her body.
From that grounded, unshakable place, she communicates the structural requirement clearly and dispassionately.
She might say, "Mom, I want to have a relationship with you where we truly enjoy our time together. For that to happen, my body and my diet are no longer topics of discussion."
If the conversation turns to my weight, I will simply change the subject or end the visit because it doesn't work for me.
Oh, I love that phrasing. It doesn't work for me. There's no yelling, there's no dramatic fight, there's no trying to convince the mom that she's wrong.
It's just, here are the parameters for the bridge to say out.
But let's game this out further. What happens when the mom escalates? Let's say the mom starts crying.
She says, "You're punishing me. I'm your mother. I carried you for 9 months, and I'm just trying to help you because I love you."
And then an hour later, Sarah's sister calls her. The sister acts as the flying monkey, saying, "Sarah, why did you make mom cry? Just let her make a little comments. It's not a big deal. You're ruining the family dynamic."
How does Sarah hold the line of workability when the entire family system is attacking her structural requirements?
This is where true power is forged. When the mother cries and the sister attacks, they are trying to drag Sarah back into the gap of emotional reactivity.
They want her to feel guilt, so she will abandon her structure.
Sarah must recognize that her mother's tears are her mother's responsibility, not Sarah's. Sarah doesn't have to defend her sensitivity. She doesn't have to argue about health statistics.
She just holds the line of workability. She tells her sister, "I love Mom, and I want a relationship with her. But discussing my body doesn't work for me. I've communicated what I need for the relationship to function."
Sarah is not attempting to control her mother's thoughts, her mother's underlying judgments, or her sister's opinions. She is strictly managing her own environment.
If the mother cannot adhere to the structural requirement, then the frequency or nature of the contact must naturally adjust to protect Sarah's well-being.
And this provides the natural progression into understanding what happens when those requirements aren't met.
Because once you establish what workability looks like for you, you have to face the stark reality of whether your parent is actually capable of meeting those structural requirements.
Mark and Lynetta lay out 3 clear tiers of contact: full contact, low contact, and no contact.
And I want to stress this to the listener. None of these tiers is morally superior to the others. Choosing full contact doesn't make you a better child, and choosing no contact doesn't make you a bad one.
It's entirely based on what is structurally functional. Let's define them clearly. Full contact is the ideal scenario where both parties are capable of honoring each other.
There's mutual respect, safe communication, and a genuine enjoyment of each other's company.
Low contact is a pragmatic, protective adjustment. It means you set strict boundaries around the frequency, the duration, or the specific topics of interaction because your nervous system simply cannot handle full, unfiltered exposure to the parent's behaviors.
And no contact is exactly what it sounds like. A complete cessation of interaction because the environment is too toxic, too volatile, or deeply incompatible with your well-being.
And the fascinating thing about Lynetta's story is that she actually experienced different tiers with her own parents.
Let's talk about her dad first, because this is an incredible, beautiful success story of achieving full contact.
After going through this framework, Lynetta decided she wanted to see if full contact was possible with him. But to do that, to build that bridge, she had to clear the air regarding a painful childhood memory she'd been holding on to for decades.
She brought it up to him. And what's amazing is how he responded. He didn't initially remember it, which is very common, but they kept talking. They stayed in the dialogue.
And a couple of weeks later, he texted her. Instead of deflecting, instead of explaining it away, instead of telling her she was remembering it wrong or making excuses, he took total, unvarnished ownership.
He wrote, "I'm aware that some decisions I made may have hurt your soul."
That specific phrase, "hurt your soul," shows a profound, mature willingness to step into her reality. He didn't defend his intentions. He acknowledged his impact.
And because he offered that pure ownership, it created massive workability. It laid an unbreakable foundation of trust.
From there, they were able to establish tools like active listening, where they actually mirror back what the other person is saying to ensure understanding without defensiveness.
Because of his willingness to meet those structural requirements, they built a beautiful, robust, full contact relationship. They literally text every day now. It's a total transformation of a relationship that was previously strained.
But then we have to look at the other side of the coin. We have to contrast that with the reality of her relationship with her mother, Marilyn.
And this is where things get complicated, because Marilyn was simply not capable of that kind of flexibility or ownership.
Here we have to bring up a very specific context regarding Marilyn's life. Marilyn is a Jehovah's Witness.
And the rigid religious requirements of that specific faith created an insurmountable wall between them.
This is a profound example of a fundamental structural clash of values. In Marilyn's paradigm, her religious doctrine was the ultimate and only truth. It dictated every aspect of how she was required to interact with the world.
Because Lynetta chose not to practice that religion, Marilyn viewed Lynetta as fundamentally wrong. She believed Lynetta was actively choosing not to serve Jehovah.
Lynetta, on the other hand, required the freedom to hold her own beliefs and to be respected for them without constant proselytizing, judgment, or conditional love.
It created this tragic stalemate. Lynetta would say, "Mom, you are choosing not to be in my life because you won't respect my boundaries."
And Marilyn would counter with, "No, you are choosing not to be in my life because you won't serve Jehovah."
They were locked in this endless loop. Marilyn could not bend on her religious requirements without violating her own deeply held beliefs. And Lynetta could not surrender her freedom of belief just to please her mother.
The structural requirements for workability were completely, fundamentally incompatible. The bridge could not be built because the ground on both sides was moving in opposite directions.
Therefore, the only logical self-protective outcome was to alter the tier of contact. For many years, this meant absolute no contact for Lynetta and Marilyn.
Later, as things evolved and the emotional charge neutralized further, it adjusted to low contact.
But the paramount takeaway here for the listener, the absolute core of this entire deep dive, is the concept of reclaiming your power. We must use the word power here.
Yes, your power. I want everyone listening to really hear this. Choosing low contact or no contact is not a failure.
It is not something you should ever feel guilty about, even though society constantly pushes this relentless narrative that family is everything no matter what.
Choosing to distance yourself for the sake of your own emotional survival and self-care is an act of deep, profound self-love. You are exercising your power.
And you must be prepared to stand firm in that power, because a parent who lacks boundaries will almost always attempt to weaponize guilt against you to force compliance.
A classic example of this is the grandparent defense. Let's say you go low contact and the parent says, "How dare you keep me from my grandchildren? You are being cruel to me and depriving your kids of their grandmother."
The societal conditioning kicks in, and you might feel a massive surge of guilt. You might think, maybe I'm being too harsh.
But when you are truly grounded in your power, you recognize that guilt trip for exactly what it is. A manipulation tactic designed to bypass your structural requirements.
You look at that situation and realize that exposing your children to someone who chronically disrespects your boundaries, who manipulates, and who models toxic behavior is absolutely not in your children's best interest.
You are protecting them from the same invisible operating system that infected you.
You stand firm. You can mentally tell them, the door to contact is open on my side, provided the structural requirements for respect and workability are met. If you choose not to meet them, you are the one keeping the door closed.
That is owning your power. And here is the most crucial, liberating insight to wrap around all of this. You, as an individual, are a creator.
You have the absolute right to construct an environment that brings you peace.
You do not need to compile a massive dossier of grievances to justify your distance to anyone else. You do not need a judge, a jury, or society to declare that you suffered enough to warrant low contact.
You do not need to prove to anyone that your desire for peace is valid.
You are capable of having it simply because you want it. Your desire for a healthy, functional life is the only justification you will ever need. You are the creator of your reality.
That is so freeing. You can have it simply because you want it. No justifications required. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought.
I want you to look at your own life right now. Are you spending your precious, unrecoverable present moments sitting in the lobby of your own life, just waiting for an apology from a past that is already gone?
Are you waiting for a fantasy parent to walk through the door and validate the bed you made 50 years ago?
What would happen? How drastically would your energy shift if you decided today, right now, that you no longer need their permission to be proud of the bed you've made?
Today we explored how to break free from dysfunctional family dynamics and discovered the tools to create true workability in your relationships. To get your own copy of I Want My Mommy, including full downloadable text, audiobook, and recorded meditations, Go to mommycompleteexperience.whythiskeepshappening.com. Release the past. Reclaim your power. Start now.